Okay, everybody, thanks for joining us for this really exciting conversation with Dr. Alec Couros. We're going to be talking today about digital identity and digital presence, and we're so excited to have him with us. Thank you for taking 30 minutes out of your day to answer the questions that really come from the crowd, not from us, to really kind of dig into digital presence. This week in the Human MOOC, while we're talking about the community of inquiry, we're really focused on instructor presence. But what everybody in Human MOOC wants to know is, why is digital and presence important to online educators?
Well, thanks for having me. This is really great to be here, and I'm always excited to participate in a MOOC, and it sounds like it's going really well. So I think, you know, the question around digital presence, why that's important for online educators. First of all, I'd probably preface that with the idea that I think online presence is increasingly important for anyone that's participating and trying to be successful, I think, in a knowledge economy, period. I think that's, you know, if we look at the way that we engage in the world, if we look at new opportunities for creativity, for connection, whether it's for professional reasons or whether it's for even personal reasons, the way that we connect online, whether it's for the way that we connect socially, the way that we grieve, the way that we meet people. These are all very much tied into the digital presence that we develop online. For online presenters and educators, I think it's increasingly important for all of those reasons that we model those particular aspects of how to be someone online, how to be online, how to live online, how to relate to one another, how to learn online. But also, I think it's the idea that we can use our connections, we can use our networks, we can develop presence through networks, through being open, through being visible. You've often heard the term lead learner. Lead learner, I think, is very apt in this particular case, that we demonstrate how we can leverage connections, how we can build connections, how we can develop our identity online, and this is becoming increasingly important to a learner, and not just an online learner, but a learner in general is someone that understands that the internet is much more than looking up stuff, you know, basically going to the internet to find information. It's a way of how we connect and negotiate and converse and negotiate knowledge online, and that really starts with an online identity.
Okay, so jumping on what you said,
Sure.
how to build that presence. So how do you become visible online? For those who are not as active right now and want to build that kind of reputation, what kind of steps do they or should they take to start doing that?
Well, you know, I think, you know, for instance, you know, the service that Jim Groom and Tim Owens have, they have a service called Reclaim Hosting is what I use, and I'm not selling anything right at this moment, but I think it's the one that I use, and the idea comes from the University of Mary Washington, where they look at the idea of domains, of building your own domains. The idea that if you go to a university, the university will help you create a domain, they'll sponsor your domain name, and then basically give you the space to build up your reputation. So I think, and even Gardner Campbell talks about this, the idea and the importance of building a personal cyber infrastructure. So I really like the idea when I see my own students develop, you know, buy their own domain name. They're basically no longer renting their space on the web. They're actually investing in their identity online. So that's one way of doing it. You know, getting a WordPress blog, creating a presence for yourself. Dave Cormier would talk about, you know, declaring, which is one of the interesting ideas of when you're in a MOOC, you declare yourself, and I think that's the beginning of it. So whether that's in WordPress, whether it's in your own domain, whether it's an about.me page, just to have a space that if I Google you, I find the things that I need to find about you. I can find out what you're like, you know, who you are, what you represent, what your learning interests are. These are really important pieces for me, and I think that's the beginning. So I think, you know, those digital literacy skills that come with that, like some people may think it's very difficult to set up a domain name. Really, it's much easier than you would possibly think, and I think there's whether you have photographs and whether you represent yourself visually, that's another thing. But even just getting your ideas online, a space to share your thoughts. And I know many people who do that, whether it's through their real names or their pseudonyms, but to develop some particular space that if I'm looking for the authoritative source of you on the internet, that I can find that.
So you bring up a really good point, and before I jump to the point you made, I have to say thanks for being an honorary Texan.
Oh, yeah.
I just saw the license plate on the wall behind you. Woohoo!
Right. Have to see that. There we go.
I love it.
This is actually from Paul Arwood. He sent it to me. So.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Amazing. So for all those Texans out there, we've got a bunch of folks from Texas in the MOOC because Matt Crossland, who's doing this with us in George Siemens Link Lab, is so UT Arlington's very involved. So
that's hilarious. I'm glad you good eye there. Good eye.
Shout out to all the Texans. So you made a good point about Googling people, and as a person who hires folks, I find that that's a real common practice now. I talk to other people that are in positions where they're hiring staff. Tell me, what are the kinds of things that you usually recommend to digital educators?
Right. Well, whether HR departments admit to it or not, they're Googling you. I think that's really important. It's become very standard. Sometimes for particular reasons, you may or may not be able to admit to that. But I know that this happens, and it's quite rampant. It's become normalized, I think, in terms of how we actually vet people for particular positions. And I think what's important about that, and I've heard this in the past, where it's sort of like a credit rating, the credit analogy, that basically you can have all sorts of negative stuff on you, so that's your bad credit, and that's a bad thing. But having nothing on you on the web is also sort of the same thing. So no credit is the same thing as bad credit, as you would with that particular analogy. So if I know that you're up for a particular position and there's absolutely nothing about you, you've done nothing on the web, you haven't contributed it in a way, I think that's somewhat telling. Not that you haven't done anything, but you haven't been visible about that. So when I'm thinking about hiring a teacher, for instance, I would be thinking about what sort of role model are you for our future students? How are you representing yourself online? As we know that students on average now are online, have a digital presence. I think the last stats I read were about 80% of kids by the age of 2 have some sort of digital presence, right? 37% of kids, or 34% of kids in North America have a digital presence before they're even born. So they have a sonogram or something shared. So like if we can't, as educators, sort of model for them, I think that becomes a bit of an issue. So I guess the first question is like, the question I'd have as a recruiter is like, where have you been? We live in this time of abundance of information, of connecting and networking. Where are you on the web? Why can't I find anything about you? And again, it's not necessarily pictures, but it's like, where are your best ideas? Where can I find your best ideas online? That's one way of looking at it. And I think it's also important, from that HR perspective. Say you're hiring a new teacher or an administrator, and you have all the great references on credential, on the record, but then there's a couple of things that might be shady about you or whatever, maybe not appropriate. You can have all of those fantastic references and achievements and so on, but unless you deal with that sort of stuff at some level, I think it's not that people may not want to hire you, it's that you will be Google searched by your students, you will be Google searched by your parents, by the parents of those students, you're Google searched by everyone. So how do we actually, as Seth Godin talks about, basically build the idea that you create so much stuff out there of you that this stuff kind of goes way down the Google search sort of level. Now that's not always possible in all cases, but I think we have to not only deal with the digital artifacts that are about us since we're very young people, but we also have to, I think, as a larger approach, think about digital forgetting and forgiveness, and how do we actually, look at particular parts of our identities that we just don't think about, that they're not relevant anymore. This is something you did as a 17-year-old kid. Maybe this is a time we let go of these things, and I think society has to learn about these things as we move into a space that more and more people are online, and that we have to think more holistically about a particular person's identity versus basing it on one particular artifact, one tweet, whatever it might be. So that, and I've actually written a recent post about that on that particular subject.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because we hear a lot about the line blurring between personal and professional lives when especially that we're online. And I mean, for me, I try to keep them separate as much as I can. I know some people are more comfortable with that situation. This is my life and this is who I am. But some people are not as comfortable, and there are a lot of negative side to it. And you probably
of course
know.
Yeah.
So what kind of steps can people take to kind of make sure that that they are safe? Whatever they
Right.
try, is there something that they can do to make sure that they are safer? I'm not going to say safe, but at least safer.
No, I think that's a really important point. I think for the ability for me to be able to create the identity that I want, that I have so far, it's been also from a position of privilege. I'm able to do things, for instance, just from a gender role, and specifically, as we know that females are much more likely to have personal attacks online, for instance, and so I might say the same thing as a female blogger or a female vlogger might say, and those would be met with all sorts of antagonism. So understanding our particular privileges and understanding how to sort of vet our privilege, and understanding even as an instructor who's guiding students in developing online presence of some sort, we have to understand the differences in cultural and gender viewpoints, for instance, that people can build almost identical identities, but these are received in very different ways. And so to understand these problems of misogyny and hatred online, and how we can actually develop identities that fit, that allow us to be comfortable in those particular spaces, but also that acknowledge these particular differences. And I think that's really important. So safety is safety as an objective truth, but also as a relative truth. I think we all have to understand, we have different comfort zones in terms of the way that we actually feel safe online, and I think that's very different from student to student. So I've had students even in recent courses who aren't comfortable in developing that particular identity, and so often those identities are much more around ideas, less visual. Sometimes they're using a pseudonym or some sort of alternate internet identity, which allows them to sort of still voice themselves online, to perform online, but not necessarily performing for their real identity, right? So, and that's, again, in quotations, I think is really important. So I think there's a lot of things that we have to consider. I mean, especially with working with young kids, we have to think about one of the things that I think about very often is kids have never lived in my children, for instance, have never lived in a society where you upload something and it can be seen by millions. They have never lived in a society where that hasn't been, where you upload something and it can potentially be seen by millions. Did I say that right? I don't know. I think people understand what I'm trying to say. They've lived in a meme/viral society their entire lives. Whereas we're sort of, I think many adults are sort of finally grasping that idea that, I mean, we're very fortunate that we perhaps didn't live in that society from the beginning, because some of our missteps would have been on the internet, seen by millions of people as well. So I think many people that I know in very high-powered roles or respectful roles may not be in the positions they are in today because of a misstep they might have taken in their high school days. And I think we have to really think about that.
Yeah, I agree. And your point about the female blogger and some of the things that have happened in the past, I spoke with one, I'll leave the name out,
Yeah.
not too long ago for a book chapter that I wrote with a colleague, and she said one of the rules that she really tries to live by is don't feed the trolls.
Yeah.
Because it would consume her, where she would just be so worried about the perception or what other people would think about what the troll said, and that she has just learned to deflect. And I think that perhaps that's a skill that maybe you guys have better than we do. We tend to be more emotional
Well,
beings for the most part.
that's not just that's to me the idea, the concept of don't feel the trolls is not just simply a mantra or good advice. It's an essential digital literacy. It's the idea that how do we, and this is a part of the last course, a graduate course I taught was one of the things that we talked about, and I want to make this into a full course at some point, is basically around the question, is critical online discourse possible even? Can we really, truly come to agreement, consensus, probably not consensus ever, can we respect differences of opinions online? Can we really, truly have critical online discourse where it's thoughtful, respectful, and so on? So until then, I think we have to understand there's particular strategies that we have to take. Again, looking at differences culturally and from a gender perspective, understanding that when you say don't feed the trolls, I don't have to worry nearly as much as a white male that I will actually even be faced with trolls. Not that that doesn't happen at all, but because I have privilege in my particular position, I think that I often see this much less. And when I do deal with it, I'm able to deal with it in a very different way than others may be able to deal with it in similar situations. So I think part of it is some trolls are much harder to avoid, and that's basically based on your privilege and your position in society as well, and how you react to them. So for instance, if a troll were to, even beyond all those things, even just thinking about the numbers of readers and followers and that sort of thing, people will be in very different positions. So someone just emerging into a network with few followers and few positions, it's very intimidating for someone to come online and not have the support of a network online. So how do we actually develop people who can be strong and can be resilient in those particular spaces, especially when I think it's very difficult now it's much more difficult than it was 5 years ago to develop a strong and resilient network, just because there's so much noise. We've reached the extent in many cases to large networks. I think people who came on early were able to amass followers and develop these really strong relationships. Now what you're seeing is there's so many. I mean, it's typical for people to have thousands of followers now, but it doesn't necessarily mean there's tighter connections than we've ever seen before. I think people often just mass followers as metrics, but not really building stronger relationships as we should online. I'm not sure where I went with that particular point, but
no, it's a good point though, because I think sometimes the number of followers you have becomes a metric, and
right.
when you look at someone's list of followers, you can tell if they've gone out and bought followers or,
right.
I mean, so I think you have to manage that part as well.
Yeah, there's a comment yesterday. Someone said, "How'd you get so many followers?" And I just said something like, "I've just been here a very, very long time," and it's just after a while it just sort of happens. And when you're one of the first people through the door, you tend to have more. It's not that I'm saying something better than someone else. It's just that after a while, you just sort of accumulate. And but ultimately, it's also interesting to see is some of the I've obviously gained a lot of relationships over the years, but if you've heard of Dunbar's number, it's the idea that roughly we have 120 to 150 people that we really know very well. So it's kind of a sociological construct. But basically this idea that really, if I think about it, some of the closest connections are the people I met that very first year blogging or the very first year tweeting, and some of those people stay with you. And of course you do start to grow relationships, but it's less frequent than you would think when you have 100,000 followers. It's just it still comes down to that human element. How many relationships can we truly have? And I think that's a big part of thinking about this bigger question that we've been talking about today. Granovetter talked about the strength of weak ties. That some of our best inspirations and ideas come from people in our network, people we don't necessarily know. So that's one part of being an online educator, but there's also the other aspect of it. Some of our best collaborations, and I'm not talking about ideas, inspirations, some of our best collaborations come with the people that we know very well, that we've actually forged incredible personal and professional friendships. And I think that's and I can think, I'm sure you have a number of people who are your go-to people, who are those that you collaborate well with. Not that you can't collaborate with other people, but it's certain people that are your key collaborators. And I think there's the strength of weak ties, but there's also the strength of those really strong connections. And we have to basically develop both of those in a network world.
Yeah, it's what you say about having the network shaping your ideas and thoughts, and I feel this so strongly because there are times when I have ideas, or thoughts about something or research, and then I think about it, and I'm not sure who came up with it exactly. Was it me? Was it them? Like, we were talking about something, and you just come up with the idea, but I don't know if it was me, So it's I think it's really important to also think about the kinds of networks you want to be involved in, because they really do influence,
Right.
trajectory.
And on that point, Maha, there's I think there's Stephen Johnson wrote a book around where good ideas come from, and he talks about, first of all, there's those half hunches that we kind of lay off in our blogs, and so we put little pieces of ideas on our tweets, and then all of these things come together, and then we all of a sudden, these half hunches turn into a really key idea, and then you come up with it, and Whitney comes up with it. We all come up with this same idea. And so if you look at historically, there hasn't been as many eureka moments, I guess. This idea that someone just all of a sudden this idea comes from absolutely nowhere. It's actually an accumulation of all of these smaller ideas. And because this is happening in so many different places in the network, and we read the same people, and we see the same half hunches, that there's multiple discoveries, right? There's actually people who discover the same thing almost at the same time, simultaneously. So although, and that makes it really tough for trying to find the origin of ideas in our current state of attribution that we look at. Well, this must have originated somewhere by some person who just had this eureka moment, but that's not the way ideas work anymore, especially in a network world.
Yeah, and I wonder, as we're getting closer and closer to the end of our half hour, if you have recommendations.
Quickly, boy.
I know, it flies by.
Sorry, I talk a lot.
And I got a tweet from Maha Bali. Thank you, Maha, for letting me know I was quiet. Is this better? Alec and Maha, can you hear me better?
I can. Yeah.
Okay, great. So what recommendations do you have for online educators who may not have much of a digital presence so that they could get started building theirs? Because I think inside the Human MOOC we have a pretty good mix of people that are very digitally connected, but for those who aren't, who may be watching this later or live, what can they do to start building their digital presence?
Well, honestly, I think the first place is a place to start to write, a place that you can share your ideas. And I mean, blogging, people have different perceptions of blogging, and I blog probably less than I used to. But blogging is still the place where when I have those ideas that I want to really bring up, those are the places I do it. And between blogging and a Twitter account, I mean, that really forms my identity. And so I think those places to write, to share your ideas, to connect are key. And so I'm assuming most people have those things already, but really, thinking, going in, you've got many people will have holidays here. How do you represent yourself in these particular spaces? So, on a Twitter account, do you have yourself positioned in your profile that you actually are comfortable with what you're saying on there? Are the things that you are saying in your profile the things that you want for other people? Do they allow people to connect with you, I guess, in terms of your interests and the things that you shared? So maybe even tweaking those things. Even having your profile photograph. This is the thing that people will see continuously for years. I mean, decide on something that becomes your trademark photograph, and it doesn't have to be your best photograph. It has to be something when I see you in the stream that I know that it's you, that I can connect to that person, that I respect your ideas, that I want to learn from you. And so I think those particular things and how you can actually position those also on a blog or something else. So I think most people really do need a space for those shorter ideas, those connections, such as Twitter, and a place that they can actually blog. And I would, think, for people thinking about it, if you want to invest in your identity, think about buying a domain name. For like, $20 a year, you can actually have a space that's all yours as well. So so investing in your online identity is a great idea as well. For my students, we suggest an about.me page, And an about.me page is like a business card on the web where basically you can inventory all of your online spaces. I find that my 18-year-olds that come to the as undergraduate students, they're often, they're faced for the very first time. This is the first time that they've ever been told that, hey, recruiters are looking for you, and then they realize that the things that they did in high school perhaps aren't the things that they want to be representative of them, and so they start to delete old Tumblr pages or make them private or delete particular Facebook posts. But I think once you start to move those things into like that online business card, such as an about.me or a flavors.me, I think there's another one, then what I think what you start to do is you deliberately, in that, when you move that Facebook account to your about.me, you're saying, I'm declaring myself. I'm also starting to think about myself as a professional online. So that's another space as well, to have those multiple spaces. And I don't know if you need everything. Everyone doesn't need to get into every single social network. You don't. I mean, LinkedIn, I have one, but it's just like, it seems like I'm just collecting people. I've never done anything on there, and I don't mean to. It's just, a friend request here and a friend request there. So even downsizing your network, I think, is also an important strategy as well. So at some point, what spaces do you close? Because after a while, your identity becomes diluted. And I think it's important to actually think about what you don't use, what's not useful to you anymore, and start to do a bit of a cleaning, I guess, on your identity, and move in and concentrate on particular spaces.
One of the questions that we had. Am I echoing?
No, it's okay.
I didn't change anything.
It's good over here.
Yeah, okay, so yeah, one of the questions that we had, and I think you touched on this, is how to manage the human element, the biases, perspectives, and personal ethics when we're engaging online. So you want to be your authentic self out there, but you also want to be respectful of other people. And right. I think what you said, it's more of how we, in a way, we need to change how we think about these issues and be more open and respectful. And I think having that question asked just shows us that we're actually moving that way, which is a good thing. But if you have anything else to add, because the cultural issues in the human MOOC has been one of the major issues people talking about.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I think we have to remember that our, thinking about Goffman, a sociologist, I forget the actual book. I'm trying to remember. He talked a lot about performance, and basically he was talking about face-to-face performance. But like, for instance, right now I'm performing in a particular way for this invisible audience that is out there, right? That I don't know who's out there, and I can't possibly perform for everyone. But if this were my high school friends that I've known for 30 years or whatever else, I might perform in a different way. Or if I go home to play with my 1-year-old son, I perform in a different way. And no one wants to hear me with my baby voice right now, right? But that idea of performance. Oh, now I'm at. Okay, hold on. That idea of performance. And that's why I echo. Here we go. That idea of performance, I think, is really important. That I think, as Resh and Boyd talked about, they talk about the idea of collapsed context. So we've often taken on sort of this grammar rule where you're supposed to perform in a way that your grammar's listening, and you should make sure I'm volume for a second. If you're that grammar rule, you basically should perform in a way that if your grandma's watching, she would be respectful of that. But at the same time, what I worry about that is continually perform as if our grandma was in the room, or like we sanitize ourselves. We get to the point where we become so incredibly ineffectual online that we can't do the good work of a teacher, we can't do the good work of an activist, we can't be political, we can't do the things that I think are really essential to be a citizen online. We can't take any opinions, we can't form opinions, we can't say things in the wrong way. If we want to be passionate citizens, I think we have to think about how do we actually take on the struggles of identity, be comfortable in the way that we voice opinions online, obviously being respectful to those, and listening and trying to think of all of the ways that we can actually bring in thoughtful and critical conversation, but at the same time we still have to stake stake particular positions online. We have, and again, this goes back to the privilege question. Some people can do this better than others, but if there are people out there, and I can think of, politicians and so on who are taking on, very harsh stances on the world. As citizens, how do we counter those if we are, constantly trying to protect and conserve our identities in a sanitized way where we actually just have no opinions on anything? And I know this is a very difficult thing as teachers and educators, because often our security of our positions, of our jobs, of our future consequence, of our future employment may hinge on something we've done online. But how can we actually balance this idea of having a positive digital identity with the ability to actually make change in a world where everything that we say is being counted or looked at, or held against us in some way? So I think there's something to do. I think it's not enough just to have a positive digital citizen, a positive digital identity online. We have to also be able to be active citizens that take important stances on things that we believe in.
That's absolutely spot on. I have to ask you, do you have time for one last question?
Oh, of course, yeah, of course.
We had Sunday
Or
Richard.
text at any time, anytime.
Oh, right. For Sunday Richard, who's online and tweeted this one in, just thought it would be a good way to kind of wrap things up. She wants to know how to encourage well-established academics to build a digital identity.
That's a really good question. So I think one of the things that we've seen in academia is this idea of, impact. I mean, we see impact factors, and if people are well known in particular journals, they will rest their careers on that idea. But I think that idea is past. I think we're getting to the point where certainly new academics, and I think, shout out to Valencianos and Von Stewart, who talk about the idea of network participatory scholarship. I think that's a really important idea, that we start to think about the idea of being a scholar today is very much different than it was 20 years ago, 50 years ago. It's not enough to simply publish online. We also have to engage, people who would find our work important, I guess, important enough to continue on. We have to engage in conversations around our work. We can't just publish in a journal and just take off. And I think there's an ethical issue around that. It's not just simply about reputation and career advancement. For academics in particular, I think we hold an ethical responsibility to not only disseminate, but also to engage in the work that we have. I think John Walensky talks about this a little bit. The idea that some of the response, I think he calls it I can't remember the actual term, sorry. Look up Walensky and think of, and the idea of the open, it's something around the open principle. But basically it's the idea that our responsibilities cannot end on publication. We have to also allow for any particular opportunity to make our work as widely available to those who might profit from it in sort of an intellectual capacity, for us to also allow us to advance our ideas in a much greater way. And the reality is, if you publish to particular journals, even if they're top-tier journals, the take-up on those particular ideas can be pretty sparse. I mean, there's not a whole lot of people reading some of these, even these high-end journals, versus getting our thoughts out, making some of our publications or even things like this, I think, are important to get more people engaged in the important ideas that come out of higher ed. And I think that's a service, in my mind. It's what we do as academics, especially public academics, to allow our ideas to educate, for us to also be educated by the public, and in terms of how we can actually interact and so on. I think it's all just downhill in terms of looking at our participation in society. So I've kind of wandered off on that particular idea, but hopefully there's some tidbit of something important there. But ultimately, what I'm saying is, I think we've turned the corner in terms of what an academic is, and what an academic should do, and I think we have to start looking at new measures of what it means to be successful or ethical, I think, when we're working within an institution like a university or college.
Well, great conversation, Alec. I think we could probably talk to you for a full hour, but we did promise you 30 minutes. So I know we didn't get to every question. Actually, the Q&A list is kind of flying by on the right-hand side of my screen, and I apologize if we didn't get to ask your question. I would imagine, Alec, you wouldn't mind if they tweeted a question.
Oh, of course, yeah. I'll take on anything you like, and if I've missed anything, let me know for sure. Always happy to take them. I'm Couros on Twitter, and thanks to everyone who's watching, and thanks for both of you for having me today.
Thanks so much, Alec. I really appreciate you making the time for us, and thanks for being a big part of the Human MOOC.
It's great. Congratulations. See ya. Take care.
Bye.